viewers, how you doing? Today with me is Pat Liddy for Walking Tour. Hello sir, how are you?
I'm wonderful, Chris, and yourself?
I'm very good. I'm glad to be part of this whole segment where we are at the Dublin Castle. Yeah. So Pat, can you talk us through what's behind us? Just the history behind where we are today.
Well, one of the very first occupations in the Rising of 1916 was an attempt to take Dublin Castle, but that was a secondary effort. They first of all occupied City Hall here beside us, and then a number of the surrounding buildings, so they could put snipers on the roofs to try and contain the troops inside in Dublin Castle, or to contain reinforcements being sent to the castle. But they saw an opportunity maybe to rush the castle. Straight away. Not part of the plans really. And they came and they were met by 5 or 6 British soldiers who were not armed. There were no bullets in their rifles. That's a separate issue altogether. And a policeman from the Dublin Metropolitan Police, a man called William O'Brien. And William O'Brien put his hand up to the leader, a man called Sean Connolly of the Citizen Army, and he said, Sean, he knew him. That's the extraordinary, Sean. Go home to your wife, he said. And Sean Connolly shot the policeman dead.
Because he said that?
Well, just he stood in the way. And of course everybody was all, anxious to get on with the job, and obviously in his excitement he shot the policeman dead. And he was actually the first casualty on Easter Monday, that poor policeman.
That was amazing. Okay, viewers, we'll be right back after this. There's so much about these 1916. We're back on in Trinity College.
We are, and people don't realise the role Trinity College played in unravelling the 1916 Rising in favour of the British against the rebels. Because when the rebels marched right past Trinity College on their way up to Stephen's Green or on their way up to City Hall in Dublin Castle, they didn't take Trinity College, which was a big mistake, with hindsight, of course. There were lots of weapons in storage in Trinity they could have captured. There were no soldiers per se in the college, but there were a few people in there that had military training as part of the officers' corps in there. So Trinity College, as soon as they realised there was a rising, closed all their doors, and over the rest of Easter Monday invited in any British soldiers that were walking in the streets anywhere around the campus. They invited them in, and in no time at all they had snipers all along the roofs of Trinity College.
So how come they weren't aware that there was no one in there in terms of the snipers, the Irish, the British? How come there was no one aware that these people are in there?
It seems surprising now, but I guess they just didn't have the intelligence, the information, how useful it would have been. And of course, there weren't enough volunteers to capture a campus as big as Trinity.
And is it because of the one in Dublin Castle that's already been done? Is that why they kind of thought probably maybe there's nothing happening there?
Well, it was never in their plans to take Trinity. They felt it was beyond them. Plus, it was a Protestant university, very loyalist place, and they knew they would have a hell of a job to take that place. Downriver in the distance there, Chris, you can see Liberty Hall, that tall building with the comic kind of covering on it at the moment. That is the new Liberty Hall in the sense it was built in 1962, but it replaced the famous Liberty Hall, which was the headquarters of the trade union. Jim Larkin and James Connolly were heavily involved in, and it was from there that the whole Easter Rising was organised, and several of the units started out on Easter Monday. And of course the British knew that was going on in there, and they thought there were still rebels in the building, and they brought a gunboat up the River Liffey called the Helga, and they shelled the building, not to bits. They made quite serious holes in the building, but the buildings around it, which were a lot of slums, were demolished, and sadly people were injured. Maybe some people were killed there as well, and there was absolutely nobody left in Liberty Hall that day. So it was all very unnecessary.
So many history about the old city.
You could have a programme that lasted 20 hours and you wouldn't fit it all in. Well, Mursery is extremely historic in its own right.
Yes.
Very significant in the whole 1916 story.
Okay.
But long before 1916, it was a trading street, just like you see today. People selling fresh fruit, vegetables, fish and so on. But of course, around here also were some of the most incredible slums and tenements of Dublin. So a lot of the people living around here were living in dire poverty. The building over here, where it says 1916, just to the right of that is number 16, which was the headquarters of the Rising. Wondering about what to do next. Patrick Pearse allegedly saw 3 or 4 men on the street with the white flag, and they were shot to death by the barricade, and they were lying in their own blood here on the street. And Patrick Pearse looked out and saw these elderly gentlemen, as he called them, dead, and he said, look, enough civilians would have died, and so I think it's time to surrender. So the surrender terms, which there weren't any, it was unconditional as it turned out, were organised from this building. And eventually Patrick Pearse, to make a long story short, walked down with Nurse Elizabeth O'Farrell to the barricade and was met down there by General Lowe.
Entail on what's going to be inside?
It's going to be the stories of the last night in there, and the surrender, and the story of the characters who were involved in there. And it's all going to be very low-key, and a certain amount of digital aids and so on, you know. But it's part of the government project to remember 1916 into the future for future generations.
What a story. Thank you so much. Okay. It's a pleasure. Viewers, this is some of the story. I hope you've learned something from it. It's in 1916 and it's Pat Liddy. Pat, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you. Thank you very much.